Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the second debate of the American Solidarity Party's 2023 presidential primary. My name is Jeffrey Combs, member of the Presidential Primary Committee and chair of the American Solidarity Party of Tennessee. This evening, we'll be hearing from an incredibly deep and accomplished field of presidential contenders. Tonight, we will be questioning the candidates on the tenets of whole life politics and their ability to campaign effectively as the representatives of a third party. First, let's have a brief rundown of the rules. 1 minute per candidate, opening and closing statements. 2 minutes per candidate for the debate questions. Now, time may not be reserved. If you yield any time, it is gone. 2-minute extensions are available per candidate. Sorry, two-minute extensions. Now, time again may not be reserved. So if you yield any time, it has gone. You will be given an audible cue with an approximately 10 minutes left and another one when your time is complete. Now, the clock will be monitored closely. We will not shut you off mid-sentence at 2 minutes, but you will be stopped shortly thereafter. And if we necessarily have to, we will cut your mic. We ask that you are courteous of your other candidates and focus on your priorities and what makes you the best candidate. Attack policies, not people. And please do not talk during someone else's time. If you cannot be civil, your mic will be cut and you will lose any remaining time in your current statement. A second infraction may lead to you being removed from the debate. We're also asking that you mute your microphone when you're not speaking. All candidates will be afforded the chance to speak on each question. Now, there's a set order for candidates to speak in, and each subsequent question will begin with the second candidate to speak in as they did in the previous question. This includes our opening and closing statements. And here for our second debates, our moderators come from the Young Americans for Solidarity. Erin Neely. Erin is a member of the Young Americans for Solidarity and currently co-runs the YIS Discord. She is working on graduate studies in physics right now, but is considering running for office someday. And second, we have Trey Trapani. Trey is also a member of Young Americans for Solidarity. He's a member of the Presidential Primary Committee and is building an American Solidarity Party chapter at the University of Missouri, where he is studying political science. Erin, Trey, we hand this debate over to you.
Thank you. We will start with our introductions going in reverse alphabetical order. Peter Sonsky, you have 1 minute to introduce yourself. Please begin. Remember to unmute your microphone, please.
Thank you kindly. Thank you very much. Good evening. Greetings, everyone. I am Peter Sonsky. I am an American Solidarity Party member and an elected official from the state of Connecticut. I am wholeheartedly a proponent of the ASP's principles and its platform without exception, without caveat. I invite you, please learn more about me and my candidacy at petersonsky.com and sign up for my weekly newsletter at the bottom of the homepage. This is a presidential cycle that has great potential for our party. I invite you, please examine my positions, examine my experience, and place your confidence in me to represent the American Solidarity Party in 2024. Thank you.
All right, then we will move to our next candidate, Joe Schreiner.
Yeah, hey guys, and solid young solidarians. my kids would have called that cringy. That's what we used to say back in the day, solid. And it means something that's high quality. And that's how I personally see the ASP platform. Solid, solidarity. Now, in an attempt to get the younger vote here, I want to assure all you younger Pelicans that, well, I was young once too. It's hard to believe, but I probably listen to better music than you guys. Pink Floyd. Sound familiar? You know, I went to Bowling Green State University, and years later, the editor of the campus newspaper not only interviewed me, but ran some photos of me when I used to have an afro. But during the interview, I was asked what advice I had for the student voters. This is what I said. And bear in mind, the BG mascot is a falcon. I responded, I urge students not to be critical thinkers, analyzing data about each presidential candidate from every angle. Then, after careful analysis, I'd vote for the guy that went to BG. Go Falcons. Now, tonight, you guys can see the shirt here. I would ask you to vote for the guy who's wearing the Pelican. You know what I'm saying? So that'll be the most important thing said tonight. I'll pass. I got to take this band off.
All right. Do we have Erskine Levy present? Okay, seeing as he is having technical issues right now, let us skip to our next two candidates and then come back to him. Dr. Larry Johnson?
Thank you very much, and I'm so glad to be here for the second debate to address the issues which are so important to Gen Z and the millennials, especially those Gen Xers who don't get very many mentions in between the boomers and everybody else. Millennials make up 3.5% of the nation's wealth today. Compared to boomers at the same age range, boomers were at 20% of the national wealth. Gen Z makes up 27% of the workforce today. By 2025, they're going to make up 30%. If you combine both Gen Z and the millennials, by 2025, they will make up 75% of the workforce. So it is very important that our policies address these populations in a concrete fashion. My campaign is about that. And the question I have for the millennials is, do you want to return the New World spirit to a new America? I'm Dr. Johnson. I hope to lead you in that direction for the future. And I ask for your vote on May 24th. Thank you.
Okay. Now, Dr. Levy, we can come back to you. You have 1 minute to give your introduction.
Well, first off, my name is Erskine Levi, and I do want to clear up. I don't know where that came from. I am not a doctor. So I have my highest degree is a master's degree. So I just wanted to, in case anybody out there was wondering, is he a doctor? No, I'm not. So let's see. What are the requirements to be president of the United States? You got to be 35. You got to live in the country for the past 14 years. And you have to have be naturally born citizen of the country. So I think all of us here, I've not really asked them directly, match all that. So what makes me different? I'd like your vote for the nomination of the American Solidarity Party. What makes me different? Let's see. Well, I have that. I do have some experience holding a public office. It's not very high. I've never been president before, but I have held a political office. Got 6,400 votes to get there. And right now, I'm in a political office at my school. I'm part of the school site council, which was an elected position by my peers at the school to hold it. I help run the school. I do financial and for curriculum matters for the school. And besides that, which again, not required, none of that's required, but I do have that experience. And I also want to mention that, and I mentioned it before, I do have a military background. Made it to the rank of captain, and I think with my military experience and working with generals, that I make possibly a good man. The wool pull over my eyes, and I'd probably hit the ground running and and I'm a former police officer also. So part of the executive branch does enforce laws. And as a police officer, I had to enforce local, state, and federal laws. So I think I have some good experience. So I would like to have your vote come voting day for the ASP nomination of president. Thank you very much.
Okay. Jacqueline Abernathy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, ma'am. Hey, fellow Pelicans. I'm Jacqueline Abernathy, and I just want to say that a master's degree, first of all, is nothing to sneeze at. And I think that captain is certainly worth noting if we're going to talk about titles. So henceforth, I'm going to refer to you as Captain Erskine Levi. Okay. So I am from Texas, and I am fresh off of my gubernatorial campaign I got the Solidarity nomination here in Texas. I too am a lifelong, consistent life advocate. I have been a pro-life activist from womb to tomb since college. I've been passing laws since college, and I am a millennial, actually. You're never supposed to ask a lady their age, but no one's asking. I will just volunteer. I'm an elder millennial. I was born in 1980. So I am native born and eligible to run. I actually looked for a running mate, the young lady that was responsible for the Dobbs case. She was a lawyer in the Dobbs case that ended up overturning Roe v. Wade. I thought that she might be interested in perhaps being a running mate if I am nominated. She's 33. So we have an up and coming crop of impressive young people that I feel like we should be incredibly grateful for. Thank you so much for having me. If you want to learn more about me or my campaign and what I stand for, please visit abernathy2024.com.
All right. Our first question of the night is going to touch on the subject of healthcare. Easy access to healthcare should not be a luxury because it's a basic human right. As such, the party calls for universal healthcare by diverse means, including single-payer initiatives, direct subsidization of provider networks, subsidized education for medical professionals willing to work in rural areas, support for cost-sharing programs and mutual aid societies, home care grants, simplified regulation, and the easing of restrictions on the importation of prescription drugs. What policy or policies would be at the top of your administration's reform agenda?
Joe Schreiner, it is your turn to take this question first.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Trey. Our campaign healthcare plan embodies a grassroots county-to-county template. Think subsidiarity. The system would include local healthcare levies to fund EMS services, as well as localized versions of Medicaid and Medicare. The system would still allow for private insurances, private hospitals, private medical practices. But here's the kicker for those who might still find themselves on the margins. All the counties would also have a combination of the following. In Monroe, Louisiana, we researched a community pharmacy with volunteer pharmacists, volunteer aides going into nursing homes to get leftover medication from those that are deceased. And then people in the town would donate money for over-the-counter medication, etc. If you are a low-income family or a senior living on a fixed income, the community pharmacy is where you'd go. In Grand Junction, Colorado, we researched the Marillac Hospital. There were volunteer doctors, volunteer nurses, volunteer general citizenry that did intake and janitorial, all kinds of stuff. The procedures were on a minimal sliding fee scale. And in Marquette, Michigan, we researched a private doctors' medical access coalition where these doctors provided free appointments each week. So if you plugged all of this into each county as if they were puzzle pieces, you would dramatically shift the ethos in the county. But there's more common sense and prevention. In Athens, Georgia, we met with ER Doc Jonathan Davis. He said to us, 33% of emergency room visits are totally unnecessary. And so if he was Surgeon General, he would start a campaign throughout the country, just like, the Stop Smoking campaigns, in order to educate people about what they needed to go to hospitals for and what they didn't need to go to hospitals for. And finally, at Auburn University, we interviewed Professor Maureen McEldowney, who was a healthcare economist. And what she said to me was 30% of what's in the hospital is extraneous paper shuffling. And so if through the amalgam of things I just got done talking about were instituted, you would dramatically shift the paradigm in the country. And as an addendum, the Salinas, Kansas Journal asked me one time about prevention.
We are going over time there, Joe.
You don't hear, how do you hear the thing?
Yeah, we thought the beep was working, and so we'll have to work on something else for the sound effect. So I apologize for that. The beep didn't work as we wanted. I think they're on break. So
Well, is there a way to see that?
we will work on that. Yes, we do appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Next up is Erskine Levi.
Yes, just letting you know I'm still having some issues here with my technology. But Joe had a whole bunch of good ideas. The only problem that it's not a problem. If you can get a bunch of people to volunteer, that would be great. But it's the same thing with 911 calls. People call 911 for various reasons. I can think of one that to how to have a recipe to bake muffins. I mean, and what's worse is the operator for 911 will actually tell them how. But I mean, we got to educate a lot of people on what to use hospitals for, what to use emergency rooms for. But my point that I want to bring up is that jobs, a lot of like beginning level jobs for teenagers getting in, just getting their feet wet at fast food restaurants or other venues. The jobs will, on purpose, not give them full-time hours to qualify for medical, dental, and eye vision benefits. So consequently, you have a lot of teenagers will be working for 25, 30 hours. They need 35. They're not going to get it. I believe that there should be some sort of basic medical benefits just in case something happens, and it doesn't matter how many hours you work. So the employers have got to be able to come up with this extra medical benefit just in case. I mean, it's maybe not a lot of stuff. Maybe it's not going to help them get their eyes fixed or plastic surgery or anything, but basic stuff. Now, how do we do that? We've got to give some more breaks to the businesses. We've got to cut some of the red tape to be able to have them do that, and maybe even financially support them somehow so they can offer medical and dental benefits to their employees. Maybe lower the minimum. Maybe it's 35, maybe lower it to 20. I wouldn't lower it to someone's only working 5 hours a week, but you got to lower it a little bit to get more people to have some medical and dental benefits. So I would be in favor of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Dr. Jacqueline Abernathy.
Well, I'd like to take my 2 minutes on this just because my PhD happens to be in public policy, specifically in public health policy. So I have a lot of thoughts on this that I'd like to make sure that I briefly, concisely cover. And I have to respectfully disagree, Captain, with your idea about expanding medical access through employers. I think that that's probably a large issue, a large part of our problem. Is that anytime that we attach healthcare to employment, we leave out a large swath of the population. And then I think that got proven pretty much during the COVID-19 pandemic when we had a whole bunch of people at work and a whole bunch of people that were out of work in desperate need of healthcare. And you've seen what they've done in Hawaii, for example. Hawaii was one of the first states to try to impose the idea of employers being forced to provide healthcare for employees past a certain number of hours. And after that, most Hawaiians ended up juggling 2 jobs because in order to get around it, to get around that mandate, employers started just, not breaking the law, but no longer having full-time employees. So I see some issues with that. What I would like to do to deal with the healthcare crisis is I'd like to piggyback on what some other candidates have said. There is a lot of precedent when it comes to our country, despite being kind of laughed at by the rest of the industrial world for not having any sort of socialized medicine or at least universal access. There is a precedent associated with the fact that in 1972, Richard Nixon, of all people, expanded Medicare to include kidney dialysis, not a means test, just anyone who's in renal failure who needs kidney dialysis can get kidney dialysis by virtue of being a human that needed it. And then in 1986, we had the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, EMTALA. And we've all seen when you go into the hospital, there's a big plaque that says that you have to be seen regardless of your ability to pay if you're in a life-threatening situation that threatens your life or the life of your unborn child. And this is across the nation, even in states that might not necessarily respect an unborn child culturally as a fellow human being. So we have somewhere to get started there. I would like to make the association between positive and negative rights. Apparently, we believe that it's not that we have the right not to have healthcare denied from us, but it provided positive rights versus negative rights. I would kind of like to see our healthcare reformed in a way that mirrors public education. So there would be a expanded Medicare option for those that need it, a public option, but it wouldn't be burdened by those that might want a private option, who might not want to wait in line, who might want and be able to afford a higher level of care. They do this in Alberta, Canada. Alberta has a socialized medicine system, but in Alberta, they have an option of you can opt out if you want to and have private insurance. And that's great because what it does is it gives the people that can afford it what they want and also doesn't get in the way of those that can't afford private care, the option to get the care they need faster. So, I would kind of like to see us go that direction. I think a logical place to start with expanding Medicare would be prenatal care. Every human has to come from a woman. That's how they come into the world. That's how we get citizens. That's how we get consumers. That's how we get taxpayers. That's how we get future workers. How about let's first expand Medicare to just automatically cover women and pregnant women. And then let's go ahead and expand it to children because we know children can't work and get insurance from their employer. So that's kind of the direction that I would like to see us go.
Thank you. And for our last response, we are hearing from Peter Sonsky.
I believe we accidentally skipped Larry Johnson.
Oh dear. My apologies.
Should I proceed?
Yes, please proceed.
Okay. First, before I answer the question, I guess I want to make one thing clear. I'm not going to engage in silly conversations about my title. I don't think Gen Z is interested in whether my Juris Doctorate gives you the right to call me a doctor or not. I think that applies to me in my field of study and not to you. It's a silly conversation. It's almost like asking, is President Obama really a citizen of the United States? You don't want to get into that. Now, about healthcare, I think for Gen Z and the millennials, the big question is, do you want to proceed to having a national healthcare service, or do you want to continue along the path of basically a free market healthcare system? And that's the big question that's going to be before Gen Z and millennials, if they want to take on, for example, the Affordable Care Act, or if they want to go into a single payer system. And by comparison, personally, I believe that we should expand the Affordable Care Act because I think it's less expensive. I am someone who supports, for example, a constitutional amendment to balance the budget. So in order to do that, we have to keep our expenses down. Presently, our healthcare expenditures are $187.6 billion a year. The estimated cost of going to a full single-payer national healthcare would be between $30 and $40 trillion over 10 years. That's an awful lot of zeros. And I think that would be very difficult for the Gen Z and millennial populations to carry over 10 years, especially when so many of them are coming into this system in debt, student loans, and other issues that are up in the air. So I believe that we should expand ACA.
My apologies. Now we are hearing from Peter Sonsky.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the question. And, as a party of solidarity, I agree that we as a society and as individuals have a duty to care for others' welfare. And first and foremost, with regard to a healthcare system, I support one that respects human life from conception until natural death, from a framework of understanding of the American Solidarity Party, as well as basic morality. I favor a nonprofit system, and I favor something that is private because I favor a system that preserves competition. And with competition, there's going to be self-improvement. The ACA, the Affordable Care Act, featured what was known as a co-op position. I think it stood for consumer operated and oriented plan. It was focused on consumers. It had regional components. It was a nonprofit feature. It had to remain so. It required that plan subscribers were a majority of the board of governance. It required that the contracts be either predominantly individual contracts or at least small group plans. All of those things are very desirable and in keeping with what the American Solidarity Party stands for. But we've got to improve affordability because healthcare is just too expensive, period. And it's profitable in many ways for the wrong people. In fact, it's very lucrative in some ways for other people. We don't want to mimic Canada. We don't want to mimic the UK. We want to reduce administrative costs and eliminate a lot of unnecessary components. I think my time is up. I'm sorry.
All right. Thank you, candidates. Now we will be moving on to our next question, which is about mental health specifically. Many factors have led to the atomization of our social structure and the rise of mental health issues as a leading concern. We know that mental health care policy has fallen through the cracks, even though we continue to see it in the news. How would you address the increasing rates of mental illness and suicide in America? Erskine Levi, your turn to begin.
Okay, thank you very much. Good question. I look at mental health. Anybody wanting to commit suicide probably has a mental health issue. I have two sons, as I mentioned before, that are both on the autistic spectrum. So I understand the mental health. I've been to several conferences and seminars to try to figure out what I can do with my sons. And in so doing, I hear and learn about all the mental health issues. There's many ways in our country to find out, and unfortunately, one of the ways is to the criminal justice system. I mean, people go to court for a crime, and they're found to be mental incapacitated to have committed the crime, and there's a lot of a record for that. There's people who see psychologists, psychiatrists, and I have other members of the family who are seeing psychiatrists and psychologists, so I understand that too. We need, as the American Solidarity Party, to help them somehow. Like, for instance, the homelessness, a lot of them are homeless because they have mental issues. We need to get them. We need to find them. We need to identify them and get them medical help. Maybe not everybody is able to be helped, but more people will be helped by doing it that we have to identify them than not. So we need to get out there and find them. And we could probably start with the homeless population and start doing some surveys, sending out people to talk to them and find out why they are homeless. And we find the people with mental issues and bring them in to help them. And as with suicide, especially, I mean, they have the suicide hotlines, but with my experience of being a teacher of a high school set of kids, they don't know it. They don't know the number, and maybe we're not doing a really good job as a society to make sure they know the number, and they're afraid to talk on the phone. Get them used to talking on the phone and maybe try to get some help. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Erskine. Just as a reminder to the candidates, the first beep is your 10-second warning, and the second beep is time. Now we will move to Larry Johnson to answer this question. Your microphone is muted.
Thank you. Mental health issues is very important to me, and I've been to a cognitive therapist before after my divorce, and after a 20-year marriage. I got married when I was 18. So after a 20-year marriage, it was very painful, very stressful, and I had to go to a therapist to deal with that situation. It was for a very dark period in my life. I call it the dark ages of my life. Um, there was a point where it was so bad when I was going to a therapist that on the day my sister died, I wanted to drive the car right into a wall and take my own life because it was that bad. It's a very painful scab because at the same time I had people piling on me who didn't know me, who were attacking me and trying to destroy me and take away my projects. So this is something that was very important. I believe that cognitive therapy is an important issue and we should fully fund it. I could say a lot more about this issue, but I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. Our next candidate is Jacqueline Abernathy.
Well, I want to say, Larry, I'm so glad you're here. And I'm so glad that you got the help you needed. And I just want to say that I'm not a clinician. I have a master's in social work, but I did not study the clinical side of things. I studied the administrative side of things. And sometimes suicide is sadly just an impulsive act born of absolute acute pain. And I recently lost my sister, and I had some of the same thoughts. And I was not going to act on them. I had strong enough convictions, and it wasn't so bad. I had enough of a support system where I wasn't legitimately afraid I was going to act on them. But these thoughts, I believe, are natural when people are going through the sort of thing that you were going through, and the sort of thing that I've been recently going through. What I would like to see happen is I would like to see mental health care basically treated the same way we treat physical health care. And we don't. There is a stigma associated with getting help for your mental illnesses or your mental traumas or mental struggles. And one of my good friends has this sermon that he gives when he is guest preaching, because he's also a reverend. He's a doctor, but he's also a reverend. And every time he gives a guest sermon, he says, we don't have pastors that are cardiologists. Someone has a heart problem, they send them to a cardiologist. You don't have them, obstetricians. If someone's having a baby in the middle of your service, you don't think, hey, I'm going to handle that. But so many people think that they are capable of handling mental illnesses, even though the brain is the most complicated part of the body. So I would kind of like to see, the first thing is that we need to treat mental health with the same degree of seriousness that we treat physical health, and we need to cover it with insurance the same way. That'd be the first thing I think that we could do to start turning the tide around when it comes to ending that stigma and encouraging more people to get the help they need and making that mental health help, say that 3 times fast, mental health help accessible to them.
Okay, thank you. I believe that was time. We are still working on making sure that the timing beeps are audible to everyone. But the next candidate to speak on this question will be Peter Sonsky.
Thank you, Erin. We talked about atomization. Atomization, obviously referring to the fragmentation or the disintegration in society, leading to these breakdowns in social structures and the support systems that many people need, which contributes to this mental health crisis we're facing. There's an upheaval in mental health crisis practice. And in some ways, mental health professionals, I think, have lost sight of the big picture. We've got to start with promotion of dignity of human life. I said that when we talked about healthcare in general. The issue of dysphoria is prevalent and has come up before in this campaign. There are mental health professionals and medical health professionals that are, rather than treating disorders, are resorting to untested chemical and surgical procedures on minors, effectively affirming them in these conditions, and very often profitably. I oppose this. With regard to the other issues that you mentioned in the question, reducing suicide, it starts with a stable economic status, a stable housing status. It starts with healthy environments and with a supportive community. We've got to broaden healthcare coverages that extend to mental health treatment. We've got to provide greater substance abuse and prevention programs. We've got to improve accessibility to care, especially among the homeless, like Erskine said. And for that matter, for people in rural areas that don't have immediate access to the treatment that others in urban centers might. We've got to train people to see the signs of crisis and to know what to do properly in response. We've got to change the culture, and we've got to change the public narrative. We've got to increase concern for other people.
Okay, thank you, Peter Sonsky. The last speaker on this question is Joe Schrein.
Hey, Aaron, I need 4 minutes too on this one, okay?
Okay.
Yeah. All right, I come at this with a good deal of professional knowledge. For 10 years during the 1980s, I was a licensed social worker and a certified chemical dependency counselor, specializing in addictions and dysfunctional family dynamics. I was also a liaison to the Cleveland Psychiatric Institute doing dual diagnosis stuff. Now, we are a society spiraling into more and more addiction. Alcoholism, drug addiction, compulsive gambling that's almost off the charts now with all the online stuff, sex addiction with, again, all the online pornography, workaholism, compulsive debting, eating disorders. This in turn causes a constellation of problems, not only for the addict, but for the spouse and the family. Domestic violence ratchets is up, depression ratchets up, bipolar disorder, ADHD, anxiety issues ratchet up in the kids, and on through the next generation and the next. And this all ripples into societal issues. Repressed anger spills over into violence on the streets and violence in the schools. There are broken families everywhere. We're now at a 70% divorce rate in America. The internalized stress leads to weakened immune systems, leads to all kinds of disease, and then leads to a tremendous drain on the healthcare system. The whole thing is a chain reaction. And for society to systemically heal, this has to be dealt with at its roots. Our administration would prioritize inspiring the establishment of more long-term comprehensive treatment programs for not just drug and alcohol, but all the addictions. And also on a grassroots level, from county to county, we would inspire a Take a Stand for Kids model. We did a 3-month in-depth study of this out on the Monterey Peninsula in California. It's excellent, multifaceted. There are in-home neighborhood groups with neighbors in recovery and therapy, and they meet and talk to their other neighbors about their addictions and their mental disorders and what they're doing to get help. Concurrently, we went to Endive, Montana, and they have a healthy community model there where, you'll like this, Shane, in the libraries, they have parenting classes. And they also have 12-step groups. And in the community center, they have a whole constellation of other mental health resources. And so that community has stepped up in order to increase the mental health in that town exponentially. I couldn't legislate all this as president, but I sure could use a bully pulpit of the presidency and also running for president in order to inspire these models and for people to start to take a look at the systemic roots of what's creating not only the mental disorders and the addiction, but how that ripples into society. We can't just keep putting social service band-aids on something that needs major surgery.
Okay, thank you. The next question comes from our friends at Secular Pro-Life.
My name is Monica Snyder. I'm the executive director of Secular Pro-Life, which is an atheist-led anti-abortion group focused on advancing secular arguments against abortion. The Democratic Party has embraced abortion extremism. They reject even common sense, well-supported restrictions like parental notification or limits on third trimester abortion, and they ostracize the 1 in 4 Democrats who consider themselves pro-life. Meanwhile, the Republican Party pays lip service to pro-life ideals, but in many cases, they don't back that up with action when it comes down to it. So how would you, as a candidate for the American Solidarity Party, distinguish yourself from the Democrats and the Republicans on the abortion issue?
Okay.
Larry Johnson, you are first on this question.
Okay, so I'm going to respectfully ask that you refer to me as Dr. Johnson, because that's my title and that's what I ask everyone to refer me to. So I'm going to ask that you respectfully do that. The question of whether or not
I'm sorry, I
somebody-
was really confused.
I'm sorry?
I am sorry about that. I was very confused from mixed messaging, but please continue, and if you would kindly restart the timer for Dr. Larry Johnson.
Okay, thank you very much. It's unfortunately, but African Americans often have to fight for their respected earnings in this society. That is still true today, as it has been true since the founding of this republic. That is what the civil rights movement has always been about. And if we're going to be for social justice in this party, we have to respect what people want to call themselves, especially when they earn it. Now, in terms of pro-life, my position on pro-life is theological. I'm a Christian. I believe that God created every person. I believe that is so from conception, and probably from my point of view before conception, in the mind of God. So any discussion on a secular level to me is irrelevant. God created man from the beginning in his own mind, Adam and Eve, male and female. And that's where I stand on that issue. Now, on a secular level, my answer is, the big argument from those who are naturalists, they want to argue that it's their body, and so they can do whatever they want. But the fact of the matter is there are two bodies. There's not just one body. There are two bodies involved. There's the one that's preborn, and that's the one that's walking the earth. And they both have the right to life. And no matter what medium that person exists in, whether it's a cell or it's bones, it's still a medium. And that medium gives them the right to life. And that's my argument. If you want to take it from a secular point of view, a naturalist point of view, the cell is a medium. Within it is a person. God created that person and the medium, and therefore they have a right to life.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Dr. Abernathy, you will be the second speaker.
Thank you. Well, I have been pro-life longer than I was a Christian. I am a Christian, but my beliefs predate my beliefs on equality and human dignity predate my beliefs about theology. And I think that it's incredibly sad that I was once so naive as to believe that the rape incest exception that we were seeing from the Republican side of things was a concession that they felt was necessary because they thought this was the only way that they were going to be able to pass any regulations pre-Roe, is if they had that exception in there. And that was until I was in college and I had a conversation and with a staunchly pro-life person that believed in rape and incest exceptions, because no, you shouldn't, no, they didn't choose that. That's not fair. And it really became clear that it was not about the dignity and the rights of the human being and their humanity. It was about exactly what the left was accusing pro-lifers of, and that is, forcing women to be responsible and punishing them for having sex, etc. To me, it's never been about that. It has everything to do with, this is a human being, and that human being has the right to live free of violence, period, full stop. And what differentiates me from Democrats and Republicans is, first of all, I've never been a Democrat. I've never voted for a Democrat unless that Democrat was pro-life. And that is because I do believe that human beings deserve the right to live free of violence from the second we know that they exist, period. What differentiates me from Republicans is that I don't want to use them as political props in order to keep people voting for me. I actually do want to protect their lives. And I have seen the right exploit unborn children. I've seen them campaign out of both sides of their mouths, especially when it comes to the rape and incest exception. I've seen them campaign on saving babies and vote for me because, I will save babies. And then, also vote for me because I'm not an extremist. I believe in rape and incest. See, we have hypocrisy, and that's how I would differentiate myself from them, is that I am not a hypocrite.
Thank you. Peter Sonsky, if you would like to speak.
Thanks so much, Aaron. I'm grateful. There's a lot of demonization on this issue and the other parties, and I'm not going to participate in that. I agree in general with characterizations, but look, there are many, many good people on both the left and the right, the Democrats and the Republicans, who agree with ASP positions, pro-life people on both sides of the aisle. Unfortunately, we can't get beyond this political posturing that both of the duopoly parties have in place to get to an agreement that abortion should be both illegal and that there should be also commensurate social programs that they be devised and funded and implemented to address the social pressures that lead to abortion decisions. There was a remark made about the Republican side. I'll say this. I'm thankful that Trump was in the White House to appoint 3 constructionist judges or justices to the Supreme Court. And today we have Dobbs to talk about because Roe was done away with after nearly 50 years due to that court's decision. We can call it a windfall, but for all intents and purposes, we should be grateful that it was he and not the opponent, because we never would be in the situation that we're in today. But I also want to say that Trump recently came out indicating that he thinks now with the Dobbs decision that abortion is an issue for the states. And that, to me at least, signals that he's not interested in being an advocate or a watchdog for the federal level. So if you think about this, the ASP, in my estimation, if it's Trump and Biden once more that are representing the Republicans and the Democrats, the ASP may have the only true pro-life candidate on the ballot. I'd like to take an additional 2 minutes, if I may, on this topic. This is an important topic. I've been involved in the pro-life movement from the beginning. In fact, I voted in 1980. I voted that year as a Democrat for President Carter. He didn't win the election, and it was at that time in the Reagan campaign that the division began. That's when the coalition of pro-life peoples went to the right, and the Democratic Party became even more entrenched in support for their abortion agenda. But there are many good people still in the Democratic Party. The party left me because of its issues. I say that the party left me rather than I left the party, but that's the truth. And, I want to say this too. As a journalist, I personally met and interviewed Norma McCorvey, Sandra Cano, back in the mid-90s. I've interviewed Joan Andrews Bell, Father Paul Marks, Nellie Gray. Cardinal John O'Connor held my son, John Paul, as a baby. And Dr. John Bruchalski, the most pro-life OBGYN in America, was my wife's doctor for our 3 youngest children. So I have been involved in the pro-life movement for a long time and a very active participant as well. What distinguishes me and my understanding on the issue, it's that holistic view. It's not just abortion. It's not just abortion. It's euthanasia too. It's capital punishment. All of these issues, we have to remember, all human life has worth. All human life has dignity at all ages and at all stages.
Thank you, Peter Sonsky. Now we will hear from Joe Schreiner.
Okay, very good. This is how I would be different than the Democrats and the Republicans in this particular thing. Besides all the campaigning, I've had a Catholic pro-life / consistent life apostolate for the last 20 years. We have stood in solidarity with people protesting in front of abortion clinics nationwide in California, North Dakota, Ohio, Maryland, Florida, just to name just a few. We have strategized with pro-life groups across the country to be more effective. And God has opened the door for me to talk in more than 1,000 churches and counting. What I say basically is this: as with putting energy into small incremental things like the environment, it's the same with this. Doing small incremental stuff with abortion at this point, in both cases, is like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. At this point, there needs to be some really strong, clear, pervasive voices in order to mobilize people. And the thing that I say in those talks is this: in order to really end abortion across the spectrum, people need to take to the streets, pro-life people, just like they did in the South in order to end segregation. That means that people need to start marching, not just in front of abortion clinics, but in their neighborhoods, in front of their neighbors. They need to start to look at nonviolent protests, and they need to be as active as possible in the legislature. But the problem in the country is we're at the 90 million abortion mark. Nazi Germany, it was 6 million. But the problem is that most of the populace, including the pro-life populace, are sitting back because they're afraid of what Marge is going to think of them up the street. You know, and I'm sorry, but at this point, there needs to be a president or a presidential candidate that's talking like this in order to mobilize people to go to the street in mass. That's the only way this thing's going to stop. You know, these small incremental things, not so much.
All right, thank you. Captain Levi, if you'd like to share your perspective.
Yes, there was a question from an atheist group. So when you have that, it never fails to go with science. And I've heard a couple of the candidates mention this. Scientifically, the baby inside the mom has its own DNA, its own circulatory system, its own blood system. It's got its own nerve system. When the mom eats food, it doesn't go in through the mom, in through the umbilical cord, out to the baby, and back out and back through the mom. No, the nutrients do. That is a separate human being, and for some reason, maybe as Joe Schreiner put it, we need to get that word out. Scientifically, it's a separate human being, and for some reason, people don't get that. It's a blob of clay. It's a piece of flesh. I had a student, high school student, that came to me once and argued with me and said, because she knew my stance, and she said, it's just a lump of clay. And I made up the most ridiculous answer to her. And I said, well, on the baby's way out, it's molded into the shape of a baby and becomes a baby after it's born. And she said, yeah. And I didn't think you'd actually believe that. Well, I said, how about a C-section when it comes out without going through the regular canal? And she walked away from me. So she didn't have an answer to that. So I don't know who's teaching some of this stuff, maybe parents or something. I know at Planned Parenthood is telling them it's just a lump of flesh, but we can't do that. It's not. It's a separate baby, a separate human being. And by the way, well, before I end, I love it when someone comes and says, well, it's just a fetus. Well, you know what it's a Latin word, fetus. It means baby before it's born. It still means baby. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next question is, younger generations feel that the older generation are out of touch with our needs. This is ever more at the front, as we have the first generations expected to fare worse than the previous ones. In addition to the issues from the previous question, many cannot afford to live on their own, even in a rental. How does your administration plan to work to keep the concerns and the issues facing younger people at the forefront of the decision-making process? And our first candidate is Dr. Jacqueline Abernathy.
Oh man, so I'm so grateful that you brought up this question. It is something that hits me on a daily basis as a millennial. I was very fortunate that I actually did purchase a home when I was 25. I was a condo, I was single at the time. And the only reason why I was able to purchase a home at 25 is because it was early enough after my student loans before they got lost with a million different servicers. And it is incredibly crazy. I know we have so many loans out there and we can't have like a single servicer the way that the federal government does in Canada. But the fact that we have so many and that we can't, divide it by last name, where, everyone who's, A through C hits this servicer, everyone that's D through, and split it up that way. I have 4 different student loan servicers right now. And it is incredible to me that, I happen to get a degree in something that I only got the degree because it was mostly funded, and I could use public service loan forgiveness as a way of paying off my debt. However, those programs have been skewered and gutted, and there are so many issues where a lot of people like me have been able to pay faithfully for years and still end up with balances where we owe more than we took out to begin with. That's obscene. So first and foremost, we need to stop predatory lending against children, because you would not give a child, an 18-year-old, 19-year-old, $100,000 for a private university degree in anthropology, sociology, anything whatsoever, when they don't have necessarily any means to pay it back. So first and foremost, we need to stop predatory lending. We need to change the terms and make it possible for people to pay back what they do owe legitimately, and not anything they don't owe. I feel like we need to reclassify medical debt in this country, because it's not like getting a credit card and paying a bunch of things and then not paying it back when you just happen to have to go to the hospital and you have a debt for that. So those are some of the things I'd like to see.
Doctor, I believe that was the
Your time is up. I'm
I'm sorry. I still cannot hear the beep. I am so sorry. I need to set my own timer. I apologize.
It's quiet. Technical issues happen. And our next speaker will be Peter Sonsky.
Forgive me, I keep forgetting to unmute myself. Thank you very much, Trey. I'm a boomer, and this question hit me right between the eyes, because I've had 2 grandchildren since the last time we had a debate only 2 weeks ago. So it's really important to me, but I have a different point of view, and I hope you'll hear me out. I acknowledge that there are differences in demographics and age divide, but you know what? There's really much more of a social or a class divide than something that's purely defined by age. And let me give you an example. I went to the grocery store this morning to do my weekly shopping. The cashier that checked me out was a retiree, or I'm guessing at least that she was of the age of a retiree. So she had the same job that a lot of high schoolers have to build up some college spending money. And yet this is a 70, and I've seen some that I presume are even 80-year-olds occupying that same job. Why? Because people who are older than me are experiencing some of the same pressures as people that are younger than me. We're different age cohorts, yes, but our experiences are not that indifferent. We're all in this together, and we need to look out for one another. The young people, the millennials, the Gen Xers, the Gen Yers, you're going to be running the government when I'm in my 90s. So please be kind to me. But look, we talk an awful lot about administration. Let's talk about the party and the campaign. Even if the ASP candidate is not elected president, there's an opportunity to influence policy. We've got to think locally at the community level. Housing subsidies for low and moderate incomes, zoning changes for more affordable housing opportunities, private ownership for and really encouraging entrepreneurial spirit. I think that's my time.
Thank you very much, and congratulations on your grandchildren. Next is Joe Schreiner.
Hey, I'm going to kind of pick up where Peter left off, but as a preface, how I've kept the younger generation in mind is, for instance, I've done focus groups and Q&As at colleges across the country over the years, Notre Dame, Franciscan University, Dayton University, many, many others. And as I've interviewed countless younger Americans across the spectrum also in the country, and on the affording to live on their own front, besides, and I think the question got a little bit mixed up, but one of the things that I propose is that first-time home buyers can tap into Social Security in order to get the down payment for the house. So I talk about that at another thing, but besides that, we went to Winona, Minnesota, where we researched a creative home share network. There's a town website that pairs elderly citizens who need help with younger folks. There are also families who rent out spare rooms at affordable rates as well, and so on. The genius of this is that it not only helps all those concerned, but you share appliances, you share furniture, and you share energy, heating, and cooling, all cutting down on global warming emissions, not to mention expenditures. So in staying with that, in Cleveland, we researched the city has a city wheel project where you don't have to have a car. A car is 1/3 of your expenses for many people. But in this particular case, they have the cars if you want to rent them to take a trip to the suburbs or to go on vacation. But otherwise, you can be car free in the city. And so point being is that's for younger people and also for older people that are struggling, using some more common sense and synergy between these kind of projects and being prudent. That's a word that's kind of gone out of our lexicons in America, but it would be important at this point to be frugal and to be prudent. We seem to have lost that. I had mentioned that compulsive debting thing earlier. So that's it.
Thank you. Next up is Erskine Levi.
All right, well, that's a really good question because I'm like right in the middle of it. I got my degrees and I still owe some money on the PSLF, the thing that Dr. Abernathy was talking about, because I'm a teacher, so I'm paying off on that. And so that's still working for me. But as being a teacher, I teach economics. And I gear my economics class to high school students that are about to graduate and be kicked out into the real world. And a lot of education places, a lot of colleges, a lot of schools try to talk to every kid, you got to go to college. Well, no, you don't. I tell my students, what do you want to be? If it requires a degree, then you got to go to college. If it does not, then don't. If it requires maybe a minimum trade school, then go there. So I'm trying to be more pragmatic, but more to the students. And of course, I do have a lot of kids in 12th grade. Some of them don't even know what they're going to do. So I try to go over some options. I show them there's 1,800 jobs out there, the different things, and maybe they've never heard about it, or they give you a patent answer. I'm going to be a nurse. Really? Are you going to be a nurse? Well, yeah, I'm going to be a nurse. Do you know what kind of level some nurses? No, they don't. So they just said it because I asked them. And so I do try to go with the students and kind of teach them what is out there. It doesn't require a degree. Don't get it. If you want to be a teacher, sorry, you got a degree. If you want to be an astronaut, you're going to have a degree. If you don't need a degree, don't get it. Now, with that, I think we should give better deals. Really instruct the students. We can't just make 18-year-olds take off these loans. There's different ways to pay for loans. There's a big grant book every year, a list of grants that people can apply for, and millions of dollars do not even get applied for. So they have to be trained in the grant book. You might qualify, apply that way, and see if you get one. And the worst they'll tell you is no. and then maybe have another option. So that's kind of like my plan.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
Dr. Johnson,
And our last,
Dr. Johnson, if you would like to offer the final word on this question.
Yes, and thank you. And I want to say that really I accept your apologies, and it's not your fault. And the confusion that was created by those who are opposed to my candidacy in dealing with that topic. So it's not your fault. Um, I believe that college education should be free of charge, that every student, their 4-year degree should be paid for, and they shouldn't have to worry about their tuition and their books and their room and board or any of that. I'm going to give you a particular program. It's called the First Dollar Program, a tuition-free program, which would cost $58 billion in the first years of its implementation. And just compare that with the amount of money we're spending in the Russo-Ukrainian war. In that war, we are basically already spent $75 billion in prosecuting that war. So that's an example of misuse of American taxpayer money. And so I believe that, graduating without debt is the best thing we could do for Gen Z and all those millennials still in school and those millennials who are starting to raise families. We should forget their student loan debts. That would make it easier for them to earn. It would make it easier for them to save. It would make it easier for them to invest in housing. All of these things we could do so quickly. And you know what? We need Gen Z and the millennials to, as a body, vote for that kind of new America, where they can go to college. They don't have to worry about that. And you know what? For those who don't want to go to college, who don't want to spend 4 years, I suggest the vocational development plan. Under my Gateway Act, the vocational development plan would allow each high school graduate to develop their own 4-year plan, and they would receive grants to carry out that 4-year plan. So if they wanted to travel and to develop their ideas through traveling, their skills that way, they can do it through the vocational development plan.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Johnson, and all of our candidates. Moving on to the next question. America is, if you will pardon the pun, a car-driven culture. Without an automobile, one has very limited options, even in most major metropolitan areas. Vehicular emissions are also a significant factor in climate change that we must factor into our decisions. What policies would your administration work towards to ensure that people, young and old, have access to affordable public transportation to allow them to commute to work, entertainment, and other essential services? Our first candidate for this question is Peter Sonsky.
Thank you very much, Aaron. Living in a rural area, I truly appreciate the concern that you express, because here it's uncommon for us even to go to a gasoline station that's less than a couple of miles away. Convenience stores are not as convenient as they are in other places. So the need for public transportation is very keen to me. Here in Connecticut, during the pandemic, the state went to the extent of making public transportation services, our buses, available to all riders within the state of Connecticut for free. And sadly, that provision has just ended, and so people are forced once again to be paying regular fares for buses. But it was an opportunity that many people took advantage of. Here in my own community, we have a multi-town shuttle. I'm pleased that we have it and it's free. The reality is, however, that it requires making a reservation, and if you've got a certain situation and somebody else has got an appointment ahead of you, it's potentially a problem. If you need a ride to the doctor, if you need a ride to another appointment, you have to hope that you've scheduled your ride early enough, but the opportunity is there. it's definitely a problem, and it's a problem that we just simply need to be more sensitive to, especially, as I said, in places with people who are without the regular means. But funding is possible for these things, and we have an infrastructure that can support people. So for all intents and purposes, this is a program that is functional and we can implement without difficulty.
Okay, thank you, Peter Sonsky. Our next speaker is Joe Schreiner.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Aaron. And in this particular case, I kind of look at this in more of a holistic way. We have a position paper on our website on transportation in America that's probably about 15, 20 pages long. The cliff note is we went down to High Springs, Florida. There's a guy named Dan Burden down there. Time Magazine called him one of the top environmentalists in the country. And we met with him. He goes all around the country touting his walkable community model. And what he does is he goes into municipalities and he shows them how to widen berm lanes, and he gets them to slow speed limits down so they're more driving friendly for golf carts and for solar vehicles and that kind of thing. And he creates diagonal paths into the center of town to shorten walking and bicycling distances. He locates senior centers above the downtown mercantile sections in order to make the stores much more accessible walking wise for the seniors in the town. And so part of our paradigm is to try and get the cities and the small towns to go to this kind of infrastructure. Another thing that we looked at was Platteville, Wisconsin. We went up there and it's decentralism. What they've done is they've created this great downtown model where they have education seminars and why it's important to shop locally. The merchants have moved above their stores, so Main Street becomes their front yard, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now in the cities, we went to Wichita and they have what are called GO zones where they subdivide the city into 15 block neighborhoods and they twin the churches with suburban churches. They have little councils for each one of the 15 block areas, and they locate as many businesses as possible within the confines of that 15 block area. And so those are all models that would work all across the country. And you could also ride the bus.
Okay, thank you. Erskine Levi, if you would like to speak.
I'm in California. Good question. I don't want to say I'm spoiled. I have a car, but I mean, we have busing systems, we have trains, we have not monorails, but the electric trains that go between cities. We also have Uber, and kids, high school kids, if they can't get home, they call Uber. Buses, we have everything. So in the area that I work in or that I live in, it's a metropolitan. I don't live in a big city, but they have a lot of ways to get around. Out in the urban areas, out in the suburban areas, might be harder. Maybe they need some more trams, like you would see at Disneyland. Some of those things to get around and make it go faster. That's what I would kind of push, is if there's people that can't get around, we need to find out how. But at the same time, I don't want to say Uber people, y'all have to charge less. They have to make money too. So maybe there's a happy medium, but we need to find something that's affordable, but still people get paid. Bus routes aren't taken away. Bus drivers get their money. Everybody's got to get paid, but we got to be able to get around a little bit easier. So we need to look at ways, and Joe had some good ideas. Look at ways to make transportation easier, and well, there is walking. There's other ways. There's even a European plan that I've seen where it's borrow a bike, the little bike things, and you borrow a bike, go somewhere, drop the bike off, go to what you have to do, borrow another bike and get back home. They have those little bitty motor, not bikes, but those, the handhelds where you stand on it. They have those in some areas in California, in cities, that let people get around them, and they just put it down and steal them because you got to have some sort of app that can activate it. So something like that might work too. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Johnson, if you would like to share.
Yes, thank you. So this is such an important issue for the future, especially for Gen Z and the millennials. And the whole idea that we cannot come to a strong plan on fighting climate change and winning that battle is just a matter of will and vision. My vision of a new America is going head on to deal with climate change. I'm for example, building high-speed rail all the way across the country. I'm for example, expanding the amount of solar power that we're using and wind power. I believe actually we should build a solar farm in space. I mean, that sounds crazy, right? But it will actually cut the cost of the expense of providing energy. It would actually make America a net energy provider. We need to do the big things to fight climate change. And the small little things that people are talking about, they're not going to do it. We have to basically have charging stations all across the United States and expand the number of EVs and make it very possible for everyone to begin to purchase those. So we have to really go big on this. We can't go small on climate change. And these are small things that people are talking about. I'm talking about something big. I'm talking about a new America. And that's what I'm calling Gen Z and millennials too.
Okay. Jacqueline Abernathy, if you would like to close out this question.
Yes, ma'am, and I want to tell you that the mystery is solved on why I couldn't hear the beep. It's suppressed. My microphone's on. That means that what is coming in is suppressed. So I'm very sorry. I have a timer, so now I know. I'm not trying to be disrespectful of anyone else's time. I want to just piggyback and say how wholeheartedly I agree with so many of the suggestions here. I saw a meme that was tragic and hilarious, and it was of an LA freeway, and it had 6-7 lanes going each direction, and it was blocked. It was a parking lot, and the caption was, well, I guess it wasn't that we needed more lanes. And this is the problem. Our infrastructure is going in the wrong direction. Our infrastructure needs to be going in more of the way of Europe in forms of mass transit, rail, for example, things that are naturally more cost effective and also energy efficient. So I would like to see more investment in that. We've already put significant investment when it comes into encouraging people to buy vehicles that are electric or hybrid, and putting in charging stations and things of that nature. We've done a lot, but we've need to realize and not underestimate people's ability to just purchase a car like that in order to get a tax incentive. I feel like that's only realistic for those that are well off. It is not a good long-term scenario. So in short, I feel like we need to change our infrastructure to one that is more pedestrian friendly, more mass transit friendly, and more rail friendly in general.
Okay, thank you.
All right, the next question is, the student loan crisis, credit card debt, and other financial burdens have created a generation of Americans unable to fully participate in the American dream. Many young Americans have put off their dreams of home ownership, marriage, family, and more because of crushing amounts of debt. How does your administration plan to address this issue? I apologize. First up is Joe Shiner.
Okay, thanks, Ray. You know, I maintained earlier that there's an ever-increasing societal problem, and it's compulsive debting. The nation currently floats on a sea of 35 trillion in personal debt. What's more, there's even a 12-step debtors anonymous group now. So on the front end, we need a public awareness campaign about compulsive debting, as there's been a successful campaign about smoking. And on the student loan issue, our administration would align with Biden's current push for some student loan debt forgiveness. And in tandem, we'd push for common sense, higher education reform, and a cultural paradigm shift. For instance, a 2-year degree with just classes in one's major would be considered the new gold standard. The elective stuff could be done at Shane's library down in Plain City or Googling the information. This reform would also include a shift to much more emphasis on learning craftsmanship and trades in vocational schools. And speaking of local, our administration would provide subsidies to improve local community colleges, which would keep more students closer to home and increase their savings exponentially. And we would provide more grants to local business incubators to cut down on brain drain and the splintering of families. And to facilitate more home ownership, we went to, as I mentioned earlier, Mankato, Minnesota, and we met with a director of the nonprofit Affordable Housing Coalition. He said that the reason many people stay in rental loop is because they're living paycheck to paycheck, and they don't have the $3,000 to $5,000 for a down payment, which I mentioned earlier. So that's that Social Security down payment. Again, if we approach this more in a common sense way and not just coddling the student, but looking at this as a whole paradigm shift, I think that would be a way saner way to approach this.
Thank you very much. Next up is Erskine Levi.
Yes, I think right away, good question. I think right away we should not let students going to college hit with these tables full of people trying to give them credit cards. You're an adult now. You can get a credit card. Come on over here. And then many of them get put into debt besides having to pay for the college if they take out college loans. I think that should be stopped. I mean, not that they can't go out and get a credit card, but why do that to the young people? Why just put it in front of them and dangle the carrot? If they really want one, they can go get one. But let's not just give it to them and put them in debt right away. And there's a lot of things to be in debt for. So you're talking about, Joe's talking about not being able to pay rent. There are some people that, not rent, but buy a house. There are some people that, retire and die renting their whole life. There's really nothing wrong with it. If you want to buy a house, you got to do something else. The education debt, they're looking in California, especially, I don't know if it's across the board, looking in California to make in 2-year colleges, just to get the basics out of the way, as Joe mentioned, free. If we can swing that would be great. Maybe then they can switch over to transfer to a 4-year later. But that is cheaper that way, and if it's free, it's free. And I would go for the PSLF loans for the people in certain industries to, give them a little bit of a break. Sometimes, even though it's by your payment, sometimes that doesn't work. So we need to look at revamping that, maybe revamping a bunch of stuff. But we need to make education affordable. And again, I mentioned this earlier, trade schools, you don't need a college if you're going to take a job that doesn't. Maybe later you can go to college if you want to. Many people go into college later in life when they want to get a promotion or change jobs. That's okay. Thank you.
All right. Next up is Dr. Larry Johnson.
Yes, and I began talking about this when I closed last time, talking about the 4-year developmental plan that students could have and families could have going forward to help stay away from getting into debt once you're finished with school. So I talked a little bit about that, but also I want to talk about what I call the SETI program of my Gateway Act. And in that, it deals with the service economy. The service economy is 77% of our GDP. It's almost over $1 trillion of our free market. And most of the people who work in this industry make low incomes. Under the Gateway Act, we work through a high-tech, high-wage process through the Department of Education, the Department of NASA, to help increase those wages. And so that will help take care of a lot of these problems that we have in our economy with service workers. So there are a lot of things that we talk about, but we have to come at this from the vision aspect. What is the vision? And my vision is a new America of a high-tech, high-wage economy based on neutrality. American neutrality, peace, progress, and prosperity. That's what we need. And that's going to help Gen Z and millennial begin to increase their worth, their financial worth and value and wealth. So I think that's all very important. And that's where I'm at. If you want the vision, that's the broad aspect, then you can go with the details once we start fighting with Congress.
Thank you very much, Dr. Johnson. Next up is Dr. Jacqueline Abernathy.
You know, I am hearing all same of the avocado toast, which I don't know if any of you recognize that meme in that debate. I'm hearing a lot of victim blaming, and that, you know, we just need economic financial literacy courses, and anybody that's in debt is in debt because they're making poor decisions, and as if it has nothing whatsoever to do with the fact that wages are not increasing and inflation is going through the roof. As if it has nothing to do whatsoever with the fact that our parents' generation, my parents' generation, and my parents were able to work for a single summer and be able to pay for an entire year of tuition. And it's increased tenfold, 30-fold. I don't actually know the exact number. It's not an issue of that we have irresponsible young people and that their debt is a consequence of their failure to make good choices. It has a lot to do with a systemic barrier placed in our economy against young people. My parents were able to purchase houses without credit scores, without student loans, because they were able to work their way through, which is something that the rest of us cannot do, but without all sorts of barriers that we now face. And I feel like rather than blaming young people for their own misfortune of having not been born in the right generation, we need to focus on what needs to happen in order to rectify the income disparity between the last generation and the new generation, instead of just assuming that the problem is us, because the problem is not us.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abernathy. And closing us out on this question tonight is Peter Sonsky.
Thank you, Trey. Higher education is a public good, but in so many ways it's predominantly a private good or personal good, and it results obviously in personal debt. I've heard Joe Schreiner talk about changing paradigms, and boy, he's on point with that. I heard Dr. Abernathy talk about making public institutions, private institutions, make their services affordable again, because she knows of a time, her parents' time, that a college education was affordable. It was a reality. But we have a student loan crisis today, and it's impacting many people. To address that specifically, I would offer that I'm amenable to ideas like interest holidays, rate reductions, limited waivers, and initiatives similar to that. But I'm not all in on all those things. I think student loans, most importantly, need to be dischargeable in bankruptcy. That's not a condition that we have today, and that's an important one. I don't support debt write-offs. I have to say that candidly. I respect people who've paid off their debts. I respect people who've never received student debt. Erskine was talking about, many people who go a different route, and we have to be mindful of those situations too. But I'm a big advocate for alternatives such as the community colleges and other low-cost options. To the bigger issue that you talked about in debt, yes, we're a very consumerist economy today, and we need to change that paradigm. Like Joe said, we need to take a new perspective on how we live our lives, what we spend on, and how we manage our affairs.
Okay, thank you, Peter Sonsky. We do have one final question before we end this debate for tonight. In addition to the mental health crisis mentioned earlier, we have a crisis of violence in our nation. Hardly a day goes by where the news isn't covering another set of unnecessary deaths. According to a recent ABC News headline, There have been more mass shootings this year than there have been days. How would you address this systemic issue? Erskine Levi, it is up to you to begin.
Thank you very much. Good question. It's horrible. It's bad. Mass shootings in schools, mass shootings at public places, and I believe you're right about we have more mass shootings than we do in the days of a year. I have a crime bill, and it needs more work, but I put it up on my webpage. If I'm going to push to get rid of the death penalty, because apparently that is not a deterrent, the murder homicide rate is going up. So apparently having the death penalty doesn't scare anybody, and I don't believe it's right anyway. So I would want to get, but in return, I have something called what I call true sentencing. If you get 3 years from a judge for whatever crime you make, you don't get to get off in a year and a half on good behavior. You got 3 years. If you get 5 years, you got 5 years. So if I'm going to get rid of the death penalty or somehow figure out how to get rid of the death penalty, then you've got to stay your sentence. And unfortunately, if you don't like that, if you don't like, oh my goodness, I got to spend 10 years in jail, well, maybe you shouldn't commit the crime. And for some reason, as a former police officer, I have seen that. This is back in the 80s, and I have seen criminals that, well, I'm not going to spend the whole time in, so I'm not worried. I'll get out real soon. Well, that's not going to happen under my administration. So I think the threat of staying the whole time that a judge gives you may possibly be a good deterrent. If you're going to get rid of death penalty, you got to deter it. And I also have a policy I put up on my website about the Second Amendment and other things. So go take a look at that. But that would be my take on crime. You got to make it where they don't want to do it because you're going to spend more time in jail. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Erskine Levi. Dr. Johnson?
Yes, and I have what's called the J. Lee Gun Violence Prevention Act, which you can see on my website, in which I deal directly with the cultural problem of violence. We have to go right to the heart of this. And the heart of this is the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is a block to reasonable gun control, to ending this violent culture. And so we have to go directly at it. And that's what the J. Lee Gun Violence Prevention Act does. The Second Amendment has almost become, for some, idolatrous. It's like a blood altar on which we are sacrificing our children in our schools. I was in a classroom as a teacher, substitute teacher, when we had a real lockdown. I had fifth graders in my classroom where I couldn't lock the door because I was a substitute teacher. And we had a real lockdown situation with a person with a gun in our schoolyards. That was a terrible experience for those kids, terrible experience for me. And I had to be there with the door I couldn't lock. And I had to keep those kids safe. And that's not something I want to see happening anymore in our country. We need to pass the J. Lee Gun Violence Prevention Act and go right at the heart of the culture of gun violence, which is the Second Amendment. I'm not saying we repeal it. I'm saying we have to modify it. And we have to make it possible for us to have reasonable gun control. If Gen Z and millennial want a peaceful future for their children in their schools, they have to nominate someone who's going to go after it all the way, deal with the culture, a new America based on neutrality and peace at home and abroad.
Thank you for your perspective, Dr. Johnson. Jacqueline Abernathy, if you would like to speak next.
Yes, ma'am. And I want to say that this is a salient issue for everyone that is on American soil. But personally, I am the wife of a high school math teacher. And I am the mother of many children. I'm the godmother of 9 children. And I still live not too far from Uvalde, Texas. And all I saw was Texas elementary school, and then it ended. There was not enough. And I knew instantly what had happened. And the amount of terror that just strikes through you at that moment, not knowing what school it was and if it was a school any of your babies are in, and then not caring because other people's babies are in that school. We have a problem. We have a big problem. And I don't think that we need to have necessarily go after the Second Amendment to deal with that problem. And here's why. That high school math teacher I mentioned that I married is also a U.S. Army infantry veteran, an expert decorated marksman, actually. And we are a gun owning household. He keeps a firearm, a handgun, and he stores the ammunition separately from the gun, and it's locked away. And he's the only one capable of actually using it in our home. But we keep it for self-defense. We don't necessarily believe that we're ever going to need to use it, but we believe that we have the right to use it for self-protection, for pro-life reasons, to protect life, not to end life. I believe that we need exceptional reform when it comes to our gun laws. I think we should treat guns like cars. With the bare minimum, we should treat them like the idea of registering them, showing that you know how to use them, knowing how to operate them safely. These sorts of things I consider just basic, the first intuitive way to deal with not having a gun fetish in our country.
Okay, thank you. Peter Sonsky?
Thank you very much. I'm grateful, Aaron. I think I remember the term that was read in the question was the phrase crisis of violence, which I certainly think is an appropriate phrasing. And I'm going to start with a promotion of human dignity and human life. And you've heard me say that tonight, and I probably say it ad nauseum, but we've lost a sense in our society of the value, the worth of human dignity. And it's being treated as though it's disposable. A part of that is that atomization that we talked about before, that loss of stability in our society, the loss of intact families. These are all contributing factors. But I think, really, as some of my fellow candidates have already alluded to, the heart of this question is really about gun policy. And so to address that, I would say this. We have laws. We have ample laws, but we don't have ample or at least universal enforcement of those laws. Also, there's been a number of successful programs that have been implemented to reduce gun violence. And I'm thinking of one, and I've cited it before, Operation Ceasefire. It's nearby me in Boston. It was implemented about, I'm guessing, 12 to 15 years ago to curb youth and gang violence. It didn't change laws per se, but it introduced ways to resolve conflict. It's not perfect, I'm sure, but in many ways, it's a step in the right direction. It may not be able to be universally applied elsewhere, but it's a creative program, and there are other creative programs that exist. We don't have headlines about Boston the way we do, for example, about Chicago and New York. People make terrible decisions and they take terrible actions. Can I go just a little bit longer on this? I think I have one more opportunity to go a little bit longer. We had 4 instances, I think, just about a week ago, and I'm going to refer to them as the trespass shootings. We had an instance where a young man was shot on the porch because he went to the wrong house. We had an instance where a young lady was shot in someone's driveway because she turned into the wrong place. There was the cheerleader, I think, or the athlete, the student athlete in Texas that was shot when she got in the wrong car. And then I think there was one in North Carolina where the neighbor's ball rolled into the yard, and there was a shooting because they went to retrieve the ball. I mean, these are all tragic cases, but they speak to the fact that people are they're not thinking right. That change in culture, that change in the public narrative, that increased concern for others, we've lost something as a culture, and we don't have anyone in either of our parties talking about this. All that they do is bicker with one another. You're not doing this, you're not doing that, and it doesn't solve the problem. We need to start with the fact that human life is valuable. Human life must be respected and upheld, and we need to support people who are having difficulty in their lives. God bless the people in Houston, by the way, and that terrible tragedy last night.
Okay, thank you so much. Our final candidate to speak on this question will be Joe Schreiner.
Thanks, Aaron. And I want the extra 2 minutes as well. Okay.
I believe you have already taken both of your extensions. Am I mistaken here?
What was the other one?
You took you did take 2 of them. I don't know exactly which ones they were, but they were fairly early on.
Jeffrey, I don't think so. Actually, I don't want to argue with the moderators, but I did on the, I forget what that one was, but I'm almost positive. Anybody else remember any of my fellow candidates?
I believe it was both of the first 2 questions.
No, I mean, I went over on the first one just because I didn't hear a buzzer kind of thing.
You did specifically ask for 2 of them in a row.
I did?
Yes.
Okay.
And one of them you actually asked when you were starting your question. And then another one you asked for extra. And then the second one you asked.
Okay. Well, I don't remember that, but that's okay. All right. All right. Very good. Well, to piggyback on what Peter was saying at the end about that we need to be addressing the people that are having these problems. To inform our position on violence in America, our family intentionally moved to a violent, hardscrabble area of Cleveland for 5 years to do research and also outreach work with the Catholic workers. How violent? In one 6-month stretch, 3 people were shot to death in separate incidences in our block. The next year, I was doing some football coaching with some latchkey kids at a local rec center when my daughter burst out of the gym door and frantically called to me that someone had been shot. It was a 12-year-old boy who had got caught in the crossfire between 2 gangs just north of the center. He made it to the gym, then collapsed in a pool of blood. He lived. 8 youth every day in our urban cores are not as lucky. They die of gun violence every day. In the schools, on the streets, every day. The Catholic workers in Cleveland worked exhaustively to change the neighborhood. They established an urban farm, a nightly drop-in center, a house of hospitality for the homeless. They coached these kids. They tutored these kids. My point being, it's too bad I don't have the other 2 minutes, is that we as a society, using the word solidarity, need to roll up our sleeves and move back into those cities and move into those danger zones and live in solidarity side by side. We went down to New Orleans and looked at these mixed houses down there where there was, what was that? Where they in mixed income houses where low income were next to middle income, were next to upper middle class homes. And so people were trying to move back into the city to live in solidarity, to raise the tax bases and make those places safer. But it's up to us. It's not just about talking about gun regulations. There's way more to this. It's a tremendously systemic thing that needs to be changed at its roots. Just changing some of the Second Amendment stuff is not, or even the Brady campaign for violence stuff, is not enough to change this whole situation. That's some, but not all.
Okay, thank you so much. Now we will hear our 1-minute closing statements from each candidate. Dr. Larry Johnson, you are first.
So there was a song by Lincoln called Breaking the Habit. And one of the big issues for Gen Z and the millennials is, are you going to break the habit? Are you going to bust out of the bygone America era, the arsenal of democracy era, and create a new America based on the spirit of the new world? My opponents, they're talking subtraction and addition. I'm talking algebra. They're talking about 3 + 1 + 2, 3 - 1. I'm talking about 3 to the 4th power. I'm talking about changing the culture of America to a neutrality culture, a future of high tech and high wages, a future where your children can go and travel to Europe and not be a target of every terrorist that has something against America and its military interventions. Vote for neutrality and the Johnson campaign. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Jacqueline Abernathy, if you'd like to go next.
Well, this has been a wonderful time. Thank you, everybody, for being here this evening. And I just want to say in conclusion that what unites us is stronger than what divides us. And I know that that cliche is becoming a little trite and it sounds like a trope, but I keep saying it because I want to make sure that when we emerge from this primary election, whomever we choose as our nominee, that we all collectively get behind that person as people who have one fundamental belief in the immutable human rights and human dignity of all people. Whether we disagree on how to approach certain issues like healthcare or gun violence is really not what matters. What matters is that our party grow in this next election. So I just want to thank you so much for tuning in. Please vote your conscience when it comes to the primary. But when it's all said and done, let's all get behind whomever is chosen.
Okay, thank you. Peter Sonsky?
Thank you, Aaron, and thanks to all involved in tonight's production, my fellow candidates, the moderators. I'm very grateful for all your contributions. I said 2 weeks ago at the conclusion of the last session that campaigning for the President of the United States is really a pretty daunting undertaking. It's very, very humbling. But I'm determined. And what makes me determined is my belief in this party's principles and in its platform. The American Solidarity Party is truly unique, and its policies and objectives are aligned to the common good. That's not just spin. That's not mere jargon. That's fact. We have a great opportunity to offer a new direction in the post-Roe America in 2024. We have an opportunity to be a uniting force for our country. We have an opportunity to speak for many more voices across the United States than we ever have before. I know the White House is a long shot, but I believe in the American Solidarity Party without exception, and I ask you, the members and voters, to believe in me as your presidential nominee.
Okay, thank you so much. Joe Schreiner, if you'd like to offer your closing remark.
Sure, thanks. And thanks, Jacqueline, for the offer. In my particular case, I was at the presidential scrum today. And one of the things that was talked about was Hawaii seems like it's easy to get on the ballot. So the guys were talking about getting together and taking a vacation for a couple of weeks over in Hawaii and bringing the candidate and the candidate campaigning while they were getting the signatures over in Hawaii. So first of all, I want to let you know that as I talked about at the beginning, with it's most important for the students to analyze everything before they voted for the guy that went to BG. This is really important. I think that we need to elect somebody who looks best in sunglasses. And so that's the only way we're going to carry Hawaii. So, sorry, now I'm not going to be able to talk. The bottom line is that that's the bottom line is that damn little buzzer. Anyway, voteforjoe.com. And Trey, just as an addendum, when we get to DC, Truman the Tiger is going to replace the bald eagle.
Good to hear.
Thank you. Erskine Levi, if you would like to wrap this up.
Well, thank you very much. Again, my name is Erskine Levi, and I firmly believe that any one of us candidates or on this panel will do an excellent job as President of the United States. And as brought up before, if I don't get the nomination, which I'm hoping I get the nomination, I will be behind whoever got the nomination. And so I will be helping them out. But I do hope for the nomination. I have things on my website, Erskine Levi for President of the United States. It says UN, but that's all they stop me right there. But so it's United States. So go there. I have blogs put up. I talk about the Second Amendment. I talk about my crime bill. I talk about background, commander-in-chief, everything there. So go there and look. I've just added stuff within the last couple of days. So go look at it. And I wish and I hope that you nominate me as your candidate. So thank you very much. God bless.
All right. Thank you very much. I do really appreciate all of the candidates that came out for the time you've worked into this. It's exciting as a member of the American Solidarity Party to see that our dreams for what this country can be is becoming more than a dream. And these are important steps as we move forward. I also want to give out a heartfelt thanks to our moderators today. I think you guys did a fantastic job, so thank you very much. I appreciate everyone's respect and thoughtfulness. And again, on a personal note, I'm just so honored to be a part of this party. Our next debate will be Saturday, May 13th at 9 p.m. Eastern. Our moderators for the American Solidarity Party will be our 2016 presidential nominee, Mike Maturin, along with journalist and writer J.D. Flynn. So we're excited for that, but we have a lot to revel for tonight. I'll let you know that tonight's debate will soon be available via podcast, which can be found by searching American Solidarity Party 2023 Presidential Primary on your favorite podcast services or going to podcast.solidarity-party.org. And again, on behalf of the American Solidarity Party in our presidential primary committee, we thank you for this debate.